everyone to the Agentic Quality Show. And today I have with me Shrish Ashtaputre. He's a Senior Technical Director at Calsoft. And today we're going to be talking about observability. Shrish, let's start. First of all, welcome. And let's start with your career journey. What is your role? What do you do? And how did you end up doing what you're doing right now?
Okay, so Tatyana, I started my career on the infrastructure side, storage, networking, data center technologies, etc., where reliability and failure are very tangible. So when something fails, it is rarely because of a single bug, but it is basically a series of interactions that could have led to that problem. Then moving into QA, DevOps, and later into innovation and CTO office role, I saw the full life circle from basically hardware, firmware, the orchestration, automation, and optimization. That gave me a systems view about how I think about quality and also made me a firm believer that quality isn't owned by one function. And how basically the systems are actually designed and adopted over time. Being in the services industry also gave me a varied perspective about looking at multiple customer problems, complex environments, different use cases, etc. That resulted basically into creating a couple of tools that we implemented at Calsoft, like CalTia, CalPSR, etc., which are being adopted by a lot of mid-size and enterprise customers today. So that's why basically that's how observability resonated deeply with what I do, and how basically I look at the complex systems and from the quality engineering perspective.
Amazing. So I've heard from you about observability-led quality engineering using AI. So is that what you're hinting at, talking about how you see the quality from the observability perspective, and where does AI come from?
That is correct. So basically, if you think of observability-led quality engineering, right? So it is essentially understanding how your application behaves in the real-world production environment. Now you think of observability platforms. So think of an application which is actually implemented or deployed at a large scale. So the kind of observability patterns that you will be getting from the production, those will be enormous depending on the size of an application, the workflows that it caters to, the user personas that it caters to. So things will become basically a lot of overwhelming. So that's where you need AI into that, which essentially help you analyze the patterns, draw the conclusions, connect the dots between different things, different matrices that you're seeing in the production. And that's how basically AI helps. Because at this scale, humans can do only so much because they will quickly get overwhelmed with the amount of data that they are getting to analyze. So that's the AI angle to that. And I think this will also help improve the overall efficiency of the QA engineers when it comes to analyzing the production-led metrics that they are getting from the observability platforms.
Right. So it's part of the shift right? What we know of shift right.
Correct.
Observability-led, but now we want to use AI to help identify the patterns of the observability to help us with identifying the problems, right?
Correct. That is correct.
Awesome. So a lot of people confuse monitoring and observability. So how would you explain for our audience what is the difference?
So basically, monitoring and observability, they are two different things. Monitoring basically tells you the real-time performance of your application, whereas observability will tell you what circumstances has led to a certain behavior that you are seeing in the production with respect to your application. So that's the difference actually. That's the key difference between observability and monitoring.
That's great. So monitoring would alert us if something went wrong, but then observability will explain why did something goes wrong.
That is correct. So it's essentially it will help you understand why the system has behaved in a certain way under certain circumstances. So basically it helps you understand what changed, where, and in what context. And therefore you are seeing a certain kind of a behavior in the production environment. And I think that is very critical from the QA point of view, because that way you can alter your testing strategy about where you should be focusing more when it comes to validation of the applications. Rather than only depending on the performance data, you can also get a lot of inferences and information from the observability platform.
And from a quality perspective, what problems does observability surface that traditional testing misses?
Yeah, I think the biggest problem that observability-led QA solves that traditional testing misses is basically the actual usage, which is actual usage patterns of your application. So in testing, workflows are bounded by specifications and tester creativity. But in production, users are far more inventive and at times destructive as well. So that's how basically the systems are actually being consumed in the production. So when we look at the telemetry data, that actually tells us which paths are used most, where the users actually struggle, where systems degrade quietly. Those insights are gold standards for improving the quality. So I think getting that information is super important. So you can think of it as you're getting these insights from crowdsourced testing platform where a lot of different personas are actually feeding you all kind of information about how they are use the product in real time, and that actually helps you fine tune your overall quality strategy.
And when does observability becomes the QA responsibility and not just the ops responsibility?
The moment QA stops thinking only about the functional verification of an application, the observability becomes the QA responsibility, because then they kind of expand their outreach about how they want to basically how they are going to test their application and what kind of insights they are going to leverage from the production. Then it becomes their QA responsibility, not just limited to the ops side responsibility.
And for the quality engineers who might not be familiar with observability or who don't use it on a day-to-day basis, what is your recommendation for what steps should they take to become aware and learn about it and start using it in their day-to-day life?
So the key aspect is basically understand where the hat of your actual customers who are going to use your application, because traditionally we as QA are basically wired to develop tests depending on the specifications or depending on our own experiences. That is not sufficient when we are basically implementing observability-led QA. So we need to basically start thinking from the customer point of view. What could be the potential use cases? What could be the user personas? So the thinking needs to be changed. Other than that, basically the tooling aspect, how basically you read the traces, how you read the matrices, how do you read the logs, events, etc., and how do you basically combine all these things together to infer the real-time behavior of your application, so that you can basically start thinking from the end user perspective and start basically optimizing your test cycle in a better manner. I think the tooling, the mindset shift, those are the very, very important things when it comes to learning or gearing up to learn about the observability-led testing.
And when you talk about the user behavior and the customer behavior that observability teaches you about, I also start thinking about the telemetry. So is telemetry part of observability too?
Yes, that is correct. So that essentially kind of a real-time behavior of your application that you are learning. What they call it as MELT, right? Matrices, events, logs, and traces. So all that data that essentially you are getting from the observability platforms, that helps you understand the actual behavior of your application in real time, which essentially a QA should convert into the real-time the test cases actually, or the use cases.
Great. Okay, and so without AI, observability could be overwhelming, right? So where
Absolutely.
does AI help the most with observability?
So AI helps in multiple ways actually. So as I said before, the data from the observability platforms could become very, very overwhelming, because at the scale at which the applications are deployed, it becomes very challenging for a human to look at all the data and infer the patterns. So that's where basically AI helps. It helps you reduce the noise. It helps you basically do the cross linking between the events. Maybe something has caused because of something else. Then basically it also help you do the predictive kind of an analytics, because there will be a lot of data which will be generated by the observability platforms, which QA teams are going to use to optimize their testing. So there will be a lot of historical data that will be stored, and that can be reused as a knowledge base when it comes to basically creating the test or creating your test strategy. So Basically, as we all know, AI is very good in basically this pattern analysis and doing the deep analysis of data and infer the patterns from that. So, in that sense, AI will be super helpful to create that strong narrative around how we should basically use observability data in optimizing the testing.
Amazing. And I love to hear that we're turning from reactive to predictive. So if we could predict the accidents or the unhealthy production behavior, like that would be the best. If we can learn about it during our daytime and not our nighttime when all of the metrics are blowing up, right? So I love to hear that. And so from your experience, there are already tools on the market that are doing this using AI in observability, right? So it's here and we already, so tell me more about that.
Absolutely. So, yeah, there are a lot of tools. There are matured observability platforms out there which are actually deployed at a production scale. But also, we at Calsoft are doing a lot of experimentation with this. We are building our own tools. So, there are a couple of tools that we have built in house. One is CalTia and other is CalPSR. So CalTia is about it helps you do the risk-based testing, understand the failure patterns, and suggests basically the most impactful test you should run. And CalPSR is a unified framework for performance, scale, and resiliency, which very well aligns with the kind of data that behavioral data that we get from applications in the production. So that those tools actually we use a lot of data from the observability platforms, of course, with the prior approvals from our customers, and then use that data to fine tune the models of these applications so that we can replay the exact user journeys in our testing. Then another way we are doing that is basically generate the synthetic data because there will be a lot of the workflows will consume a lot of user data which users will be entering in the real time, but there will be a lot of sensitive information as well. So we don't want to compromise on that. So we basically use AI to create synthetic data and use that data. Again, that data is based on the patterns that we have learned from these observability tools. So that way also basically we are using this data and the observability-led QA in Calsoft.
Okay, that's exciting. So instead of de-identifying the production data that a lot of companies are doing, so you're just recognizing the patterns and then asking AI to generate this data based on the patterns, right? So it's not using the actual data from production, but it uses the patterns. Is that right?
That is correct. That is correct. So pattern
Amazing.
basically leads to the learning.
Amazing. And you mentioned the risk-based testing. So using the same patterns, it would identify the high-risk areas, meaning the areas which customers use the most, probably, right? Or maybe the ones that are failing the most.
The ones that are failing the most. So traditionally, based on the pattern analysis, if certain surveys, certain has more failures than the rest of the features or services. So that's where basically the focus goes, and that's what we refer to as basically risk-based analysis when it comes to prioritizing the testing. So ensuring that the good amount of coverage is aligned with that particular service, that particular feature, so that we can cover the risks aspect when it comes to testing.
Amazing. And can you share some examples, how these helped you maybe speed up development or prevent production defects? Like how does that impact, your customers and their challenges?
Yeah. Sure. So I would like to give one example of one of our customers. It's a SaaS company. Basically, the releases happen very, very frequently, as we all know in case of SaaS. So in this case, the releases were happening at 2 weeks, every 2 weeks. Everything was right. There was an 80% automation coverage. There were dedicated regression pipelines. Performance scale testing was getting executed as planned. However, the production still has a lot of issues reported. So what we understood is basically while the code was being tested, the behavior wasn't getting validated actually. So that's where we started thinking about integrating an observability, or started thinking about understanding more about the production environment and how we can align that with basically the testing. So we started with basically aligning distributed tracing for every integration flow, then structured logging with correlation IDs, synthetic workload replay from production environment so that we can try to mimic the exact same scenario that is actually happening in the production. Then matrices are aligned with the SLIs and SLOs, not just basically the test pass and fail kind of status. And error budgets visibility we implemented inside the QA dashboards so that we can basically understand what are the probable errors and where basically there is a lot of errors that we are seeing in the production. The QA more of a measurable than debatable. So for example, what is the percentage of latency that we are seeing in the production? Then performance became the part of a functional testing, not as a separate job in overall test pipeline. The test coverage become the risk coverage because we were focusing more on the high risk, high impact areas, and that's how basically we aligned our testing also. And finally, the release confidence. So we implemented something as a release readiness score or release confidence score, which essentially tells you, okay, on a certain threshold above, if the score is on certain threshold above, there is a lot of confidence in release. If it is below that, then probably you should think, or maybe more testing, more validation is required. So all these measures essentially helped us fine tune that problem, and actually we successfully implemented observability-led QA in this particular example.
And hopefully their production issues disappeared, right?
Yes, absolutely. They significantly went down in terms of seeing what they were seeing earlier, production issues.
Great. Some of the things that you're talking about are great best practices of how to do the logging in production and whatnot. And so using AI hopefully speeds all of these processes up. So that's great. And so when you try adopt that in the new organization, so what's some of the barriers that you're seeing on implementing some of this?
I think the biggest barrier is the cultural shift because traditionally QA are wired to basically think binary, the test pass or test fail. Also, there is a lot of importance to the coverage aspect, that how much code or how much features I'm covering from my tests. So that mindset is a little bit of a barrier when we start implementing observability, because after implementing the observability led QA practices, these things are, of course, they are important, but there are other things which become more important about giving more exposure, more importance to your customer experience, then understanding from the production led patterns. So these things become more critical than basically the conventional ways, the how we basically think about QA. So that, in my opinion, that is the key, more important, more pressing barrier when we start implementing observability led QA. So that mindset shift is what is really necessary.
And when you do this observability-led quality engineering, does that mean that we stop implementing functional tests whatsoever and we're just driving all of the test coverage risk-based from the observability? Or do you do both things at the same time?
No, both things at the same time. So implementing observability-led QA doesn't necessarily means you stop doing what you're doing traditionally. That is equally important. I think observability-led QA is to what you are doing. So you continue doing the functional verification, you continue building your test cases for feature functional testing, your performance scale testing, etc. Observability will give you one additional perspective to how you basically fine tune the test cases and how you can add a lot more coverage from the actual real world perspective. So that, in my opinion, that becomes an add-on and that becomes a feature to actually enhance your overall test quality and test coverage.
And how does that change the life of developers and quality engineers day to day by having these additional capabilities?
So significantly, I think things become more deterministic. The decisions become more data driven. Then there is basically when we write the tests about an application, usually we tend to apply our knowledge, our understanding of a domain, our understanding of the product, and also depend a lot on the specifications which are documented about the features. Observability gives you altogether different perspective about how we basically design the applications from grounds up, how we basically test the applications from the user perspective. So all these things basically change dramatically when we start implementing observability in our testing. So the conventional ways of doing things, I think that's the unlearning that we need to do when we start implementing observability in our workflows.
Yeah. And so I remember as a tester, we always wanted to know what our customers are doing. But before we didn't even have telemetry. And then when we had telemetry, we couldn't analyze all of that. There was too much data. So we never had time to even do anything with it. And so we always relied on product managers. Tell us what the customers are doing. Go do your research, right? And so they were under the pressure to always tell us, oh, these are the most common customer behavior. And then sometimes they might be wrong. And so I like that here it gives you a real time basically data without involving any manual analysis for what the customer behavior is, right? And it's all automated, hopefully, in a way where it can create the coverage for the missing, for the gaps, right?
Absolutely. And I think AI is going to make it a lot simpler, because then we have tools at hand which can do the analysis in real time, do the pattern matching, pattern analysis, deep analysis of the telemetry information at scale, and that will basically help us a lot in how we define the quality and how we define the approach to validation of the quality of our products.
Amazing.
So I think things are getting a lot interesting.
Right. And so how does this change the perspective for managers and executive, how their view of quality and the delivery changes?
So I think for managers and directors who are the decision makers, the things become more of a data led. The decisions become data led. So they don't have to just look at the test results, the dashboards, the pipelines, and how basically things are happening in the dev test environment, but they get a lot of different perspective. There's a lot of data that they have at their hand to look at the overall product's quality from different perspectives. So they can easily map. Conventionally, we always used to map basically our tests or automation with the use cases which are documented in tools like Jira. But I think now there is an additional angle to that, or additional layer to that. So it's not just basically you requirement mapping backwards, but also it is basically requirement mapping forward, where we can map our validation strategy, our development strategy, etc., with basically what customers are actually seeing in the production. So that actually gives a completely different perspective to directors and managers to look at the quality and understand basically how things are actually going and how well aligned my product is with respect to what my customers actually want and how they will probably use in their environments. So things, I think for them it is becoming more of a data driven, and they have strong data to basically look at and arrive at a go no go decision rather than looking at just dashboards and test results.
And you talked about the confidence, the release confidence, and so that gets calculated on multiple data points, right? So how does it, can you give us a glimpse into what goes into that?
Yeah, correct. So basically there could be multiple data points to that. I mean, of course, the traceability is one part. How well you are maintaining the traceability with the features and the test automation code. What historical data tells you about the past few releases, and what kind of changes that basically we rolled into these releases. How these changes impacted the application. How basically what's the deviation between the test and dev environment and the production environment. What new patterns emerged when the users basically started using application in their in the real time environment. What is basically the resiliency factor of an application, how quickly the application recovered from a failure, what were the performance patterns that are seen in the production versus what we basically validated when it was in the test environment. What was the test data, what is the variation between what is the variation in the test data or configurations of your applications when they are deployed in the production. So all these things combined basically gives a dashboard view to the managers and directors to look at multiple data points and then arrive at a decision about whether my application is fit to go or there is something else that needs to be done, so that what my historical data is telling me that okay, I mean we made such these changes into an application, rolled it out, and after that maybe some issues that were reported from the production. So how can I basically use that data to take informed decision, do some predictive analytics, and try to basically align my dev and test strategy around that. So that kind of a insight these data points give to the managers and directors, so the decisions are always well informed, leveraging
Amazing.
the new technology.
Amazing. The more data, the better, right? So the
The more
data-driven
data, the better.
decisions are usually the
Absolutely.
best. And so with all of this happening, like AI disrupting different parts of the development, so how do you see quality evolving overall?
That's a great question. I think surely quality is going agentic, and so basically, and quality should not be limited to just testing or validation. I think it will be more than that. It will be understanding the patterns. It will be doing data engineering. It will be doing data analysis. It will be basically learning or understanding how to work effectively with AI agents, how to basically use multiple tools simultaneously to perform various different activities when it comes to testing. Because the test for test creation or test writing or even automation, only one input is no more the scenario now. There could be multiple data points which essentially will help you create a better test strategy. So learning those multiple tools simultaneously and learning to work with AI will actually is going to change how we basically do quality nowadays. And so that I think that will be the biggest shift in coming days in the QA world.
Yeah, we all have to learn all of that, right? That's such a great advice that if you don't know how to use AI or how does it work, you might find yourself out of a job very soon, right?
Absolutely.
We'll all be managing agents very soon, probably no matter what role you're in.
Yeah, correct. I mean, you're working with an agent, and you keep on thinking that there's a human tester sitting across the table, but probably that's an agent.
Maybe Shrish is an agent. How do I
Yeah,
know you're not an agent? And what should leaders, think about, or what should leaders do in this kind of time when AI is evolving so quickly? What is your recommendation for them?
Oh, so so I think there are four things that the leader should unlearn or try to refocus. So the first is basically quality is not a phase with an endpoint. So it's a continuous process. So it will keep on happening throughout the product development and even beyond product is released to the customers. Coverage is not necessarily means a confidence. The conventional way of looking at the test and code coverage may not be an appropriate measure to basically look at the quality aspect of the product. Quality cannot be owned by a single function, and I think this is a known thing for a many years now, since the inception of agile, that quality is everybody's responsibility. Traditionally I think that was limited between the QAs and devs or maybe the product managers, but now it should also be expanded to the ops side of things, which are the guys who can basically help us get the data from observability platforms. Also, it should expand beyond ops and also basically get the insights or also basically include the field engineers who are interacting with the customers on day-to-day basis and try and the lot of insights probably they will help us get optimize overall quality. And the last is quality is not limited to eliminating the failure. It is more about basically how we fine tune our approach, how we release with more confidence. So those are, in my opinion, those four things are going to be very important for leaders. Probably there is a lot of learning, relearning, unlearning that needs to be done when to adapt to these things, but that is going to be the key aspect.
I 100% agree with you that quality should be everyone's responsibility. But you would be surprised that even now, in this day and time, there are engineering leaders who want the QA to sign off on the releases. And they're like, oh, you're going to be responsible if something goes wrong, right? And I'm like, that doesn't work that way. Like everyone should take this responsibility.
Correct.
We're releasing with the bugs, we're not fixing everything, and we're all responsible. So
Absolutely.
100% agree with you on that. And I want to ask you, you're working in innovation, like this is such cutting edge tools that appeared like probably a couple years ago, and we're already on top of AI, using AI in observability. So how are you, focusing on innovation? What drives you to work on innovation?
Okay, so I think learning and innovation matter to me because of systems and people. And if you look at both these things, right, systems and people, both these things are evolving. So it is important that we as the leaders in QA should also evolve with these two factors. And staying curious is, in my opinion, only sustainable advantage in today's world when things are changing fast. I think the at the speed at which we get new AI models every day, and the speed at which we need to basically shift our focus from X to Y, and also look at multiple things simultaneously, that is, in my opinion, not possible without a continuous learning and also having some kind of an innovative mindset. And having an innovative mindset doesn't necessarily mean you are building something new, some new tool every day. It is also basically about how do you change your own thinking, how do you change your own perspective about looking at things, and that in my opinion is super important. So I love to be curious. I love to stay curious so that I keep learning something new every day, and I think that keeps me going.
Yeah. Adaptability, right? Like you said, like you have to
Adaptability,
learn and
yes.
stay curious. I always say that in the times of transition like this, adaptability is the most important skill that people can have, right? Learn, stay curious, and adapt. And then you'll
Yes,
survive, right? And you're not
absolutely.
going to become a dinosaur from the past century.
No extinct.
Well, right, and you're not gonna go instincts that right. Well, thank you for such an insightful conversation, Shrish. You're the first, leader who's talking about observability in our podcast. So I'm very excited that we got a glimpse into your world. Any final advice for our listeners?
I think it will be short advice. What I think is we shouldn't be asking whether we have an observability implemented today. I think we should ask ourselves about where we are still blind in the production. That's the key thing, because that's where a lot of things are going wrong. So if we can fix that blind spot, I think QA will become very productive and very effective, and which will lead to more satisfied customers and better products that we release to the production.
Amazing. I
I
love
think
that
that will be my
question.
only advice on the closing note.
That's such a great end note, for our session today. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing all of your expertise. Where can the listeners find you if they are interested to connect?
Oh, I'm on LinkedIn. Maybe I can share my LinkedIn URL.
Yep.
But yeah, I'm super active on LinkedIn.
Awesome. We'll share your LinkedIn. Thank you everyone for listening to us today, and we'll see you guys next episode.
Thank you so much, Tatyana. Pleasure being here. Thank you so much.